If there was one universal reaction shared across sapient species, it was the assumption that humans appeared far too fragile. The medical board was conducting an inaugural evaluation of a human volunteer, a ceremonial procedure performed whenever a new species reached the galactic stage. When lead examiner Dr. Vosix addressed the assembly for the first time, as implants synchronized around the room, his voice drifted through the sterile chamber, his green-scale hand gliding through the augmented interface, shimmering like suspended light in the air. He was a Rapali of modest height, defined by his shortened snout and conspicuous lack of a tail, a hereditary quirk that marked his lineage. The white medical coat he wore served no functional purpose in the climate-regulated chamber, yet he believed it lent weight to the proceedings. Habit from his early days, perhaps, or subtle vanity. "Is everyone receiving the augmented overlay?" he continued, straightening his collar as he surveyed the gathered clinicians. Every eye and its equivalent, some perched on stalks, others dangling from slender antennae, a few drifting freely in uncanny patterns that still unsettled Vosix, shifted toward the subject behind the reinforced viewing pane. The human stood in what the briefing described as his natural state, apparently meaning he wore nothing but an item rendered by the translator as socks. He had agreed to the examination for a few thousand credits, bound by confidentiality, and assured repeatedly that only certified medical personnel would observe. Vosix spotted a gray-feathered Zibit doctor focusing intently on the human, the angle of his narrow head tilting in a manner impossible for most vertebrates. The Zibit's feathers lifted slightly as he studied the subject, attention sharpening with professional interest. His head tilted at an angle no vertebrate should naturally achieve, a precise, almost mechanical motion that made several observers shift uneasily. The Zibit's gray feathers puffed and rippled as he studied the human, his posture radiating the clinical skepticism Vosix had come to expect from his species. "Initial visual inspection," the Zibit began, voice tight and analytical, "indicates that humans may be the least physically formidable creatures we have ever deemed worthy of examination." He paused deliberately, letting the quiet verdict settle across the chamber before continuing. "Observe the total absence of claws, talons, venom sacs, or even marginally developed fangs. Their dentition is clearly optimized for generalized feeding rather than combat engagement. The dermis presents no scaling, chitin plating, or even dense protective fur." His wing arms swept toward the human behind the glass. "From a purely biological standpoint, I would tentatively classify humans as among the most harmless sapients yet recorded. Domesticated herd animals on multiple worlds exhibit more overtly threatening traits." Vosix nodded slowly, though a familiar tug in his scientific instincts urged restraint. "An interesting preliminary observation, Doctor," he said, letting the invitation hang. "Crakes," the Zibit answered with unmistakable pride, "lead researcher in xenoevolution, Vige Academy. And to clarify, my assessment is derived solely from external morphology. Still, it is difficult to deny that humans appear fragile." Vosix silently thanked the reinforced barrier for its sound dampening. The human remained blissfully unaware of the room's collective doubt. Every head, sensor array, and ocular organ angled toward Crakes, captivated by his conclusion. Agreement rippled to professionals. Soft murmurs, clicks, color shifts, and subtle vibrations unique to each species. A towering figure at the back, from a species Vosix couldn't immediately identify, rumbled in disapproval. "Those soft keratin tips can be considered claws," it declared. "My offspring hatched with more innate weaponry." A gelatinous clinician chimed in, its words forming as ripples in the air. "The musculature isn't terrible," it admitted. "There's definition in the limbs. But compared to interspecies baselines, mediocre. My people possess double the density and are considered average." Vosix raised a scaled hand, cutting through the rising chatter. "All valid perspectives," he said. "But let us progress beyond surface evaluation. We should examine what lies beneath." He gestured toward the control station. "Activate your augmented reality overlays. Begin internal analysis." Acknowledgements filled the chamber. Nods, wing clicks, tonal chimes, bioluminescent pulses, an orchestra of species-specific confirmations. Crakes' feathers flattened smoothly as he focused, his eyes dimming with the glassy sheen of full neural synchronization. Moments later, Vosix was no longer viewing pale, bare skin. His vision shifted to vibrant, layered anatomical detail. The nervous system glowed in filaments of electric yellow. The skeleton radiated in stark calcium white. The cardiovascular network pulsed in reds and purples, an intricate map threading through the body. Immediately, Vosix noted anomalies. His gaze lingered on certain structures, peripheral readouts, streaming density measurements, volumetric calculations, and comparative indices. But he said nothing. One of his earliest lessons, as a lead researcher, discoveries meant more when others reached them independently. It strengthened science and scientists. So he waited, observed the room, watched the specialist lean forward, taking in the complexity of the human interior. Exactly then, the door slid open and someone new stepped into the chamber. Vosix turned at the sound, recognizing her instantly as one of the green-skinned peoples from the Prial cluster. She bore the distinctive silver eyelashes, and her skin shimmered with vibrant spots indicating, if Vosix recalled correctly, her emotional state and social standing. Today, her colors swirled with curious orange and eager yellow. She had clearly skipped the preliminary briefing. She bypassed the calibration stations entirely and walked straight to the viewing window, her eyes widening at the sight before her. The room fell quiet as she took in the scene. Naked human, glowing overlays, a semicircle of focused xenobiologists. Then, after only 2 seconds of analysis, she lifted a delicate hand, pointed directly at the subject, and asked with startling clarity, "Why is it so large?" The question froze the room. Vosix's mind jumped instantly to the anomaly he had noticed in the internal view. Someone else had spotted it. Excellent. A perfect teaching moment. Currently, the colors across her skin pulsed in swirling shades of inquisitive orange and bright, excited yellow. She had evidently skipped the entire preliminary briefing, because she strode straight to the viewing pane, her eyes widening as she absorbed the sight before her. Vosix and the assembled doctors watched in complete silence as she fixed her gaze on a human volunteer. Then, in what he assumed was intended to be a clinically neutral remark, delivered with a tone she clearly believed sounded professional, she pointed toward the glass and spoke after precisely 2 seconds of study. "Why is it so large?" The question hovered in the air, stark and unvarnished. Vosix felt his thoughts leap instantly to the anomaly he had identified moments earlier, certain she must be referring to the same structural irregularity. At last, someone else had noticed it. This was an ideal opportunity to teach. "Excellent observation," Vosix declared, stepping forward, his enthusiasm eclipsing his usual restraint. "I observed the same disproportion as soon as the overlay engaged. If everyone will focus on the digestive system." He swept his interface upward, highlighting the relevant organs, which glowed brilliantly across each doctor's augmented vision. "You will note something extraordinary," he continued, walking the length of the glass and tracing the luminous outline of the digestive tract. "This system is unusually extensive for a being of this scale. More importantly, observe the biochemical diversity. The stomach alone synthesizes 6 distinct enzyme families, and the intestines, both small and large, exhibit adaptability far beyond the norm." His excitement intensified as he spoke. "This strongly implies a species evolved to survive on a remarkably broad nutritional range. Plant matter, animal proteins, complex carbohydrates, even unfamiliar compounds. This system appears capable of handling all of them. In 3 decades of xenobiological study, I have never encountered such versatility. Humans may possess the most adaptive digestive architecture on record. The evolutionary implications are astounding. It suggests a history marked by volatile environments where dietary flexibility became essential." He turned, expecting captivated expressions and shared scientific awe. Instead, he found Crakes tilting his narrow head to an even more improbable angle, feathers lifting in unmistakable avian confusion. "A thorough analysis, lead doctor," Craig said carefully, his melodious tone polite. "However, I do not believe our colleague was referencing the digestive tract when she questioned its size." He pivoted toward the green-skinned newcomer, his wing arms folding in a formal posture of curiosity. "I suspect you were examining the skeletal system," he said, "specifically the density and proportions of the major long bones in the limbs." Without waiting for her response, Crakes launched into his own assessment, stepping closer to the glass. His wing arm rose, indicating the glowing skeletal framework highlighted by their overlays. I may have spoken prematurely when I labeled humans as weak, he admitted. Look at these bones, particularly the femur, tibia, and fibula. Their density ratings register at approximately 40% higher than expected for a biped of this mass. My own species evolved with hollow, lightweight structures to support semi-aerial locomotion. Many sapients share similar adaptations. But these human bones, he traced them with another wing gesture. They are exceptionally solid, reinforced, by all calculations, capable of enduring immense stress loads. A species with support structures like these cannot be dismissed. They could channel tremendous blunt force power, sustain significant musculature, and withstand impacts that would utterly shatter my own frame. My initial conclusion may require full revision. Study these bones, especially those in the lower limbs. The femur, tibia, and fibula display density readings approximately 40% higher than I would consider standard for a biped of this mass. He indicated his own frame with his other wing arm. My species, the zibit, evolved with hollow bones as an adaptation to our semi-aerial lifestyle. Many sapient species across the galaxy share comparable traits, yet these human bones are astonishingly solid compressed, and, according to the figures I am viewing, capable of enduring tremendous mechanical stress. Crakes' head rotated back toward the assembled clinicians. A species with skeletal architecture this robust cannot reasonably be classified as weak, regardless of its lack of natural weaponry. Such bones could channel devastating blunt force impacts, support substantial muscle mass, and withstand collisions that would reduce my own skeleton to fragments. I may need to completely reevaluate my initial assessment. Vosix felt a sharp sting of irritation. His digestive tract insight was clearly more scientifically significant than a mere analysis of bone density. Bone density was interesting, certainly, but evolutionary dietary flexibility revealed far more about a species' history, survival strategies, and likely development. He turned toward the visitor, intent on resolving the academic dispute in the clearest terms. Perhaps you could clarify for us, Doctor. He paused, only then realizing he had never asked for her name. What exactly were you referencing when you asked why it was so large? And which system are you currently viewing in your overlay? Then the woman lifted one graceful green hand to her temple, silver lashes fluttering with a flourish that looked almost rehearsed. Then she began to laugh, light, musical sounds like chiming glass, somehow carrying both delight and bewilderment. What do you mean overlay? She managed between bursts of laughter. Every clinician in the room turned toward her at once. The silence that followed was so absolute that Vosix could hear the faint hum of the station's environmental regulators vibrating through the chamber walls. His sense of professionalism slipped like sand through his claws. The augmented reality overlay, he said slowly, adopting the tone reserved for confused students. The medical visualization system we are all using to examine the human's internal anatomy. You must have missed the preliminary briefing. You arrived late. You need to connect your medical implant to the system. He summoned a holographic interface with a sharp gesture, quickly navigating through the visitor manifest. You should be able to authenticate with your medical license credentials, he added. Just synchronize your implant with the examination chamber's network, and you'll have access to the same internal data the rest of us are reviewing. Then the woman's laughter faded instantly, replaced by an expression Vosix's translator rendered as acute embarrassment laced with existential dread. The spots on her skin flashed through colors he had never witnessed on them before, deep purples and muddy browns that signaled overwhelming discomfort. I am... She touched her head again, as if hoping an implant might magically appear. Then her spots shifted into a shade that could only be described as mortified magenta. I came here for the cultural exposition. The word struck the room like a sudden detonation. The what? Vosix heard himself say. The cultural exposition, she repeated, her voice shrinking with every syllable. The one about first contact protocols and artistic depictions of alien species. I thought this was some kind of live art demonstration, like performance art. I saw people gathering and staring through glass at a naked subject, so I assumed... She edged backward toward the door, step by cautious step. So, you're all actual doctors. And no one here is doing nude paintings. Another step back. I suppose I should leave and find a real cultural exposition venue. The statement rippled through the room like a shockwave. Vosix observed the reaction in every form of alien physiology present. Exoskeletons stiffened, feathers flattened, skin pigments shifted, chemical markers flashed. A dozen species displayed their own distinct signs of alarm, all converging on the same realization. She was not supposed to be here. This evaluation was a private procedure, bound by contract with both the human volunteer and humanity as a species. The confidentiality clause was explicit. Only licensed medical professionals with verified clearance were permitted within the chamber. Her presence represented a breach, one that could escalate into a diplomatic disaster. For a fleeting second, Vosix wondered if they could simply erase the incident. Say nothing, let her quietly slip away, and hope no one mentioned the intrusion. But the notion died almost immediately. At least 20 doctors had witnessed the mistake. All were bound by strict ethical protocols. Hiding this would make the violation exponentially worse when not if the truth surfaced. When the inevitability hit him, he moved. His short legs propelled him faster than he had run in years. He intercepted the woman just beyond the doorway, guiding her firmly yet carefully down the corridor, away from the examination room and the viewing gallery. He could feel the stares of the human and the other physicians burning into his back as they departed. Only after they had passed several doors and reached an empty stretch of hallway did Vosix allow his composure to snap. "Why?" he demanded, his voice slicing sharper than the translator's usual softness allowed. "Were you there?" The woman, still unnamed, he abruptly realized, looked deeply distressed. Her skin spots swirled in troubled blues and grays, signaling fear and confusion. "I told you," she said shakily. "I was looking for the cultural exposition. The security officers at the entrance didn't question me. They just waved me inside. I assumed they were being welcoming. Maybe I was early or something." She sounded genuinely bewildered, far from malicious, but disastrously careless. "I followed the crowd and ended up in that room." Zix felt his blood temperature spike, not anger exactly, but the Rapalai equivalent of sharp, focused exasperation. He opened his communication interface at once and connected to station security. The exchange that followed only deepened the crisis. "Then the doctor?" the officer repeated, confusion bleeding through the audio link. "Dr. Zelinga never checked in. We've been waiting for her for 40 minutes. We assumed she was delayed in station traffic." "Wait, are you telling me someone else entered?" "Yes," Vosix replied through clenched teeth. "A woman who is absolutely not a doctor. We just assumed she was Dr. Zelinga when we saw an approaching." The officer stammered. "The species matched, the timing, it all lined up. She walked in confidently and we just—" "Oh." The officer's voice shifted to a deeply worried register. "Oh, that's very bad." "Yes," Vosix replied, his voice cooling to an icy calm. "That is very extremely catastrophically bad. It was a complete breach of contract with humanity, a violation of a confidentiality agreement that had taken weeks of delicate negotiation. And now Vosix, as lead examiner and primary liaison, would be solely responsible for repairing the damage without triggering a diplomatic disaster capable of jeopardizing humanity's integration into the wider galactic community." He terminated the call and facing the woman again. Her eyes shimmered with the look of someone on the brink of tears, though whether Neri even produced tears was something Vosix had never confirmed. The next 3 hours became a uniquely excruciating torment, unlike anything in his career. He had handled contaminated biological samples, malfunctioning diagnostic arrays, even a small radiation breach once, but he had never juggled alien diplomacy, contractual obligations, and emergency damage control simultaneously. And then, "Oh, hey!" A casual voice cut abruptly across the narrative, as if stepping cleanly through the fourth wall. "Sorry to interrupt your story and, drop in from whatever dimension I just fell out of, but I just wanted to say real quick that I genuinely love this story, and I'd love it even more if you—" A pause. Recognition. "Hey, I know you." Yeah, you've been here before. Well, anyway, the intruding voice continued cheerfully. Thanks for stopping by again, but I'd appreciate it even more if you liked this video and told others about it. Because every time someone taps, like a squirrel gets its nuts. A beat. Okay, I have to go. Bye. 3 hours had passed since the examination ended. Now the human volunteer was seated in the food court of the space station, seemingly enjoying a dish the vendor had insisted was probably compatible with human digestion. Zix had spent that entire time alternating between frantic calls with various legal departments and sternly lecturing the woman, whose name he had finally learned was Azel, about the sheer magnitude of her mistake. Do you understand? He said for what felt like the 100th repetition. How unbelievably reckless it was to wander into an examination suite without confirming where you were going, without verifying you were in the correct location, without even reading the signage on the doors. Azel nodded miserably each time, her skin spots drifting through muted shades of remorseful blue-gray. I am staring at potential legal consequences, Vosix continued, his frustration sharpening his tone beyond its usual restraint. A human could pursue litigation for breach of confidentiality. Humanity as a whole could file a complaint with the Galactic Council. This could affect their integration timeline, their trade negotiations, their diplomatic relations with the wider community. And all of this, every risk, exists because you didn't bother to check a door label. He summoned several holographic panels, displaying legal codes, contract clauses, and interspecies protocol guidelines, ensuring Azel witnessed every troubling detail. If this turns ugly, if the human decides to escalate and seek legal remedy, you'll be listed as a co-defendant. You'll be financially liable for part of any damages awarded. And considering we're discussing a breach of interspecies confidentiality agreements, the damages could be substantial. Azel's spot shifted again, the colors tight and anxious, as she absorbed the weight of each word. Azel had fallen completely silent, her spots draining into an almost uniform gray, a shade Vosix knew from the physiology meant genuine fear. I don't have that kind of money, she whispered. I'm just a cultural studies graduate student. I came to see the exposition because I'm writing my thesis on first contact artistic representations. She wrung her hands together, voice trembling. I can barely afford my station quarters. A lawsuit would... I'd be in debt for the rest of my life. She looked up at him then, her yellow eyes wide, pleading, desperate. Please, I'll do anything. I'll explain everything. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever I can to fix this. Just don't let an honest mistake ruin my entire future. Some of Vosix's frustration cooled. She was young, he realized, likely no older than some of his own graduate students at the Research Institute. It had been an honest mistake, however massively ill-advised. You'll have to persuade the human, Vosix said at last, his tone gentler. Not me. You need to tell him what happened. Apologize sincerely. Hope he understands your situation. If you can convince him not to pursue legal action, then perhaps this can be resolved without destroying everyone's careers. I'll do my best, Azel promised, her voice small but steady. I swear I will. I'll be completely honest, completely apologetic. I'll make him understand I never meant any harm. Now, as they approached the human's table in the food court, Vosix felt his stomach tighten. This was the moment, the point at which this entire disaster would either dissolve into a harmless footnote or erupt into a full diplomatic crisis. When they reached the human's table, he ended the silence immediately. Better to guide the conversation than leave it to uncertainty. Mr. Brown, he began, using the surname format the briefing materials had emphasized. I need to explain something important regarding what occurred during your examination. The human, David Brown, according to his file, looked up from his meal, curiosity flickering across his face rather than worry. Oh, hey, document something wrong with the results? No. The medical findings are perfectly normal, Vosix assured him quickly. This concerns a different issue. There was an error in our security protocols, an access control failure. He inhaled, hoping to steady himself. During your examination, an unauthorized individual entered the observation chamber. He gestured toward Zell, who stood just behind him, her spots shifting through anxious yellows and oranges. This is Azel. She is not a medical professional. She was meant to attend a cultural exposition elsewhere on the station, but due to security oversight, she was accidentally granted access to the examination room. She remained for approximately, how long? Maybe 2 minutes, Azel said softly, before the doctor noticed me. 2 minutes, Vosix confirmed. This constitutes a breach of the confidentiality agreement established with you. I want to be completely transparent about what happened, how it happened, and the measures being implemented to ensure it cannot occur again. The human's expression shifted from curiosity to mild confusion. So, she's not a doctor? He was looking directly at Azel now, and Vosix saw her spots brighten into an even more vivid and nervous yellow. No, Vosix said, she is not, and I want to reassure you that we take this violation extremely seriously. We have already enacted new security procedures, reprimanded the personnel responsible, and transferred 50,000 additional credits to your account as compensation for this breach of your privacy. The human blinked. 50,000 credits for a 2-minute mistake? The confidentiality agreement you signed includes strict penalties for any breach, Vosix explained. This is the baseline compensation stipulated in the contract. If you feel it's inadequate given the circumstances, we are prepared to negotiate. No. That's not what I meant, the human said quickly, waving his hands in a gesture the translator interpreted as denial or dismissal. I just meant that's a lot of credits for her. He paused, then looked directly at Azel. What exactly did you see in those 2 minutes? Vosix tapped Azel's shoulder gently, encouraging her to speak, to apologize properly, to explain herself, to salvage this disaster before it worsened. This was her moment to set things right. Azel opened her mouth. Shut it! Open it again! When the words finally emerged, they were hesitant and trembling. I'm sorry for seeing your, she faltered, visibly struggling. Why is it so large? The silence that followed was total. Vosix felt something inside his chest lurch, possibly his heart stopping. Of every possible sentence she could have formed, of every way she might have apologized, she had somehow arrived at the worst phrasing imaginable. He cursed and sighed, frantically cycling through every rap-like profanity he knew and inventing several more on the spot. This was it. This was the moment his career imploded. Taken down by a socially unfiltered graduate student whose attempt at contrition would no doubt become a legendary cautionary example in future xenology ethics courses. The tension dragged on, every second stretching into something unbearably long. Vosix braced for outrage, fury, demand for legal representation, appeals to superiors, maybe even a formal complaint to the Galactic Council. Then the human started laughing. Not a polite laugh, not a strained, awkward chuckle, but a full, uncontrollable, body-shaking roar of genuine amusement. He laughed so hard that nearby diners turned to stare. He laughed until he had to wipe tears from the corners of his eyes. 50,000 credits. He gasped at last, trying to breathe between bursts. As compensation because a cute alien lady made a mistake and said I was too, he broke into laughter again. She said I was too large. He doubled over, laughing even harder. That's the most hilariously absurd thing I've ever heard. Vosix stood frozen, his mind refusing to compute the situation unfolding before him. This reaction appeared in none of the diplomatic contingency scenarios he had prepared for. The human wiped tears from his eyes and beamed at both of them. I'm not suing anyone. Are you kidding? This is incredible. This is the kind of story I'm going to tell my friends back home, and they're never going to believe a word of it. Yeah, I got examined by alien doctors, and then some random alien girl wandered in, made the world's most awkward comment, and they paid me 50,000 credits to apologize. No one's going to think that actually happened. He turned toward Azel, his grin widening. I'm genuinely glad this happened. Thanks for the bonus credits. Honestly, this is the best part of my whole trip into space so far. Vosix and Azel exchanged looks, equally bewildered, equally unable to make sense of the human's response. Azel's skin spots had shifted into a confused pink shade that Vosix had never once seen described in the physiology guides. You really don't blame me? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. Blame you? The human shook his head. You made an honest mistake. And besides, you seem nice. He paused and added, his tone flagged by the translator as playfully suggestive. I should probably buy you dinner to thank you for the extra credits, if you're up for it. You know, just to show there's no hard feelings. Vosix felt his thoughts stumble. In decades of interspecies interaction, he had never encountered a cultural reaction like this. Humans, it appeared, process privacy breaches in a manner entirely unlike most species. Azel seemed just as disoriented. Her spots flashed through so many hues in rapid succession that they formed something close to a shimmering rainbow across her skin. If it's today, she stammered. I mean, I still haven't found the cultural exposition, and it probably ended hours ago anyway. So, perfect, the human said brightly. There's supposed to be an amazing restaurant on level 7. They serve food from like 20 different species. We can try a bunch of different things. Make an evening of it. What do you think? That would be nice, Azel replied, though the rise in her voice made it sound like a question, as if she still wasn't convinced any of this was real. The human stood, already scrolling through a holographic directory to pinpoint the restaurant. Great. Let's go before the crowd builds up. Oh, and I'm David, by the way. David Brown. L, she said, her spots finally settling into a warm orange Vosix recognized as pleased contentment. Just L. Nary don't really use family names the way some species do. They slip naturally into planning, what time, which place, what foods each species could safely eat. Talking with the easy rhythm of two individuals who had decided, almost spontaneously, to spend the evening together. Vosix stood nearby, reluctant to accept that the issue had resolved itself so effortlessly. He watched them finalize their plans. Well, everything seems settled, he said slowly. I should return to my duties, unless there's anything else you wish to discuss, Mr. Brown. Nah, we're all good, David answered with cheerful sincerity. And hey, thanks for being upfront about everything. Document. I appreciate the honesty. And just like that, the two walked away together, chatting about something human-related, their voices light, relaxed. Vosix remained rooted in the middle of the food court, feeling as though he had just witnessed something his mind could not fully categorize. It was now late in the station's artificial night cycle, or what passed for night aboard a station running on a standardized galactic clock rather than any planetary rhythm. Vosix had returned to his quarters, filed all the required reports, and convinced himself that the matter was at last resolved. Except he couldn't quite believe it. Something tugged at him, an itch of professional paranoia he couldn't quiet. What if the human changed his mind? What if L made another poorly chosen comment and reignited the entire diplomatic disaster? What if, absurd though it seemed, they were secretly coordinating to extract even more credits from the medical institution? He knew that last idea bordered on ridiculous. Still, the concern gnawed at him, which was why he found himself following the pair at a discreet distance as they made their way to the Level 7 restaurant. His mind still couldn't fully adjust to the notion that a major breach of confidentiality had somehow ended with laughter, dinner plans, and apparently mutual interest. He slipped inside the restaurant several minutes after they did, doing his best to remain inconspicuous. He chose a table far enough away to avoid suspicion, but close enough that he could pick up fragments of their conversation. The restaurant was filled with the pleasant bustle of multiple species, the hum of overlapping languages, the clinking of utensils adapted for wildly different anatomies, and a soft ambient melody drifting through the air. Vosix ordered something at random when the server approached, barely hearing what was recommended. His attention remained fixed on the couple across the room. He told himself he was safeguarding the facility's interests, ensuring no unexpected developments would lead to legal retaliation. But he knew he was also there because as he sat there, nursing a beverage that tasted faintly like fermented plant matter, he began overhearing pieces of their conversation and instantly realized it was nothing like the scenarios he had feared. And that's when I realized David was saying, hands animated as he recounted the story, I'd been trying to get the universal translator to interpret my dog's barking. Spent an entire day thinking the device was malfunctioning before someone finally explained that dogs aren't. You know, sapient. Elle's laugh rang out, bright and genuine. That's adorable. I'm still disappointed I missed the actual cultural exposition because I walked through the wrong door. But honestly, your stories from Earth are making up for it. I've learned more about human culture in the last hour than I probably would have learned from any official presentation. She leaned in slightly, her spots glowing with warm member tones. Tell me more about these dogs. They sound fascinating. They continued chatting, and Vosix, despite himself, began learning quite a bit about Earth and human customs as he eavesdropped from his distant table. David was, admittedly, an excellent storyteller, painting vivid images of his home world with obvious fondness. Later in the evening, Vosix caught another fragment of their conversation. They had transitioned to discussing their respective experiences with space travel, and David's voice had taken on a more playful edge. I mean, it's only fair I got to see you two, he teased, the translator tagging his tone as light and mischievous. Balance the cosmic scales a little. Elle burst into another laugh, the sound carrying clearly across the restaurant. Such a shameless human, she said, but the teasing lilt in her voice made it clear she wasn't offended. Her spots shifted into a Hugh Vosix suspected signal romantic interest, though, admittedly, he wasn't entirely confident in the color cues. Is this shamelessness typical of your species, or are you a rare case? David grinned. Well, you need to spend more time with me to figure that out, wouldn't you? I suppose I would, Elle replied softly. Even from across the room, Vosix could see her spots brighten. As the evening progressed, Vosix found his tension slowly dissolving. Despite all his initial paranoia, nothing about their interaction hinted at manipulation or hidden motives. There was no attempt to extract additional compensation, no scheming, no deceit. It was simply two people enjoying each other's company, sharing stories, laughing, connecting. The calamity that had caused him so many hours of stress had somehow become the star of what looked very much like a sincere, growing friendship. Eventually, he watched them finish their meal and rise from the table, still talking, still laughing softly together. David offered his arm, what Vosix assumed must be a human gesture of courtesy, and Elle accepted it without hesitation. Her spots shimmered in hues of warm contentment and unmistakable happiness. As the two walked toward the exit, Vosix finally allowed himself to accept the truth. The crisis was resolved. No lawsuit, no diplomatic catastrophe, no career-ending scandal spiraling out of control. Somehow, against all expectations, everything had worked out. But as he remained in the now quieter restaurant, finishing the remnants of his own meal, a lingering thought surfaced. The examination had revealed that humans were far from weak. Their unusually dense bones, their unassuming but capable musculature, and especially their astonishing digestive versatility, all of it pointed to a species with hidden durability. The initial assessments had been wildly incorrect, yet he had never learned what, exactly, Elle had meant when she originally asked why something was so large. Had she noticed the digestive system, the skeletal density, or something else entirely, some morphological detail he hadn't even considered? The question, Vosix realized, would likely trouble him for weeks. Still, as he paid his bill and prepared to return to his quarters, he found himself smiling at the absurdity of it all. Sometimes, he supposed, the universe operated in ways even seasoned xenobiologists could not fully anticipate, and perhaps that unpredictability was precisely what made it so fascinating.